Hey everybody, it's Trags. It's Wednesday, October 24th, and time for episode 268 of Patriots Beat on the CLNS Media Network. Find us at clnsmedia.com. Also, follow us on Twitter at PatriotsCLNS. Patriots seem like they're up to their old tricks. They started 1-2 and have now won 4 straight. They have their offense rolling for the most part with 2 big special teams contributions on Sunday in the 38-31 win over Chicago. They appear headed on a roll to another double-digit win season. No resistance in the AFC East in sight. The Bills, they also seem up to their old tricks. The team that made the wild card last year, thanks to Andy Dalton and the Bengals winning in Baltimore on the last day. Well, the Bills were annihilated by Andrew Luck and the Colts last Sunday, 37-5 at Indy. With Josh Allen banged up with an elbow injury, the Bills turned to Derek Anderson. They also have Nathan Peterman in short. Right now, Mike Rodak, it's really, really hard to be a Bills fan in Buffalo. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me on, Mike.
Yeah, how hard is it? I mean, after the playoffs last year, Tyrod Taylor and a great story, fighting to the very end, Sean McDermott getting the Bills to the playoffs, and then to have this start to this year at 2-5. What's the sense up in Western New York?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I guess, a realization, even right after last season, that, it was probably an overachievement, what they did last year, that it took, as you mentioned, the miracle pass from Andy Dalton on 4th down, and really a roster that probably had no business being in the playoffs. They had some wins that kind of fell their way throughout the year. A game in Atlanta where both Julio Jones and Mohamed Sanu got hurt. Game in Kansas City where Alex Smith was kind of in the middle of his rut that he had last November after they had such a great start. So they caught some teams at the right time, and, they probably overachieved last year. So I think a lot of Bills fans went into this season with tempered expectations, knowing that, they decided to get rid of Tyrod Taylor, which I think a lot of Bills fans supported. I think the idea that he was going to be their franchise quarterback had pretty much faded, and they wanted to look and try to find a next quarterback. So I think a lot of people realized in the short term there would be some pain at that position, but there's also a lot of optimism with Josh Allen, so that when he started to see some action, there's definitely some hope for Bills fans. But it's clearly been a season of transition at the quarterback spot. And now that there's an injury to Josh Allen, it's just a season of just trying to get through it. At this point, that's kind of the sense of Bills fans is, well, if we're not trying to watch Josh Allen grow and develop and watching Derek Anderson out there just kind of, meander along as a 35-year-old backup.
What's the point?
What's the point of it? Exactly. So I think Bills fans are going to come out in force on Monday night. They're going to have a good time. They're going to be hydrated, certainly. And they're going to hope for an upset. Oh, yeah, exactly. You got to stay hydrated. And they're going to hope for an upset. But I think after this game, it's, if they're 2-6, obviously the playoffs will be pretty much out of the possibility at that point. And it's just, go through the rest of the season and hope that Josh Allen comes back and hope he shows something.
Some background here on Mike Rodak. He, of course, now is the NFL Nation Bills reporter for ESPN, but he's someone who started out covering the Patriots with our old friend Mike Reese. Your last year with the Patriots was 2012. Your first year in Buffalo, 2013. You've been on the beat ever since. I'm curious to get your take on the difference in the football cultures, because there is an expectation here in New England, but I could make the argument they're just as football crazy, a different kind of crazy in Buffalo. Is that right?
It certainly is, and it's obviously been a football town that has fallen on hard times in that area. Apologize for any background noise. It's actually hailing here in Buffalo as I sit in my car.
Whoa!
But it's obviously it's been 30 years essentially since the team's had any sort of real success, going back to the early 1990s with Jim Kelly and those teams they put together, and all of the playoff drought years, essentially 18 years without an appearance in the playoffs up until last year. And you had an entire generation of fans that grew up without any idea of what a playoff game felt like, which for somebody like me who grew up in New England, and look, I mean, in the 90s when I was a kid, there was not a ton of playoffs happening in Boston. There was, the Red Sox in the ALCS. There was the Patriots in '96 in the Super Bowl, but overall it wasn't a great decade. And you get into the next decade, and it's just year after year of winning. It's been the opposite in Buffalo, where kids grow up without even a lick of what it feels like to have a winning team in town. But there is definitely an engagement factor. Obviously, there's not a whole lot to do in the winter here when the weather is bad. Than watch football or watch hockey. So whatever two of those teams between the Bills and the Sabres is doing well, you're going to get fans that are really engaged and tend to get riled up for those teams. Right now, to be honest, it's probably the Sabres that are starting to take the lead, which is unusual considering how bad they've been for the last 5 years. They've been one of the worst teams in the NHL. But they're off to a great start this year. The Bills are not, and you can kind of sense the pendulum swinging back in the direction of hockey right now.
Last time the Bills hosted a Monday night game, Mike Rodak, was November 17th, 2008. They lost a heartbreaker to the Cleveland Browns, as a matter of fact, 29-27 in Buffalo. That was important because I don't know if you remember this. That was their fourth straight loss after starting that season 5-1. That was the year, of course, Tom Brady was injured in the first game of the season, and Matt Castle came on in relief. The Pats come calling this Monday, and there's little hope in Buffalo with that 2-5 record. And just, I want to get your sense, your vibe on what kind of expectation there is around a Monday night in Buffalo. If the 2-5 start has kind of put a damper on that, or if people are like, hey, it's Monday night, we're going to put our best foot forward.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. It's almost the traditional Buffalo mentality that deep down, people seem to know that things aren't going to go well, but there's always that hope that they will, and occasionally they do. As we've seen in Buffalo, 2003 when the Patriots came in and got blown out 31-0, and in 2011 when Brady came in and threw 4 interceptions, and that Bills team started off 3-0, defying expectations. So, it can happen. I think that's the hope of the 72,000 people that are going to be there on Monday night, and if it doesn't, then they have a good time tailgating and drinking a few beers and watching the game. That's just sort of the mentality, I think, of a typical Bills fan. But they realize how much Tom Brady has owned this team over the past 18 years, and they realize that this offense that the Bills are putting out is one of the worst that we've seen in decades. And we know that this quarterback situation is heading nowhere fast. So they're smart enough football fans to realize that, the odds are certainly stacked against them in this game.
Speaking with Mike Rodak, the NFL Nation Bills reporter for ESPN. Hey, Boston sports fans, do you want to get killer seats to see your favorite team for the price of a beer or a large pizza? Tired of paying for all of the inflated markups from brokers or last-minute convenience charges just so you can end up paying courtside prices for nosebleed seats? Well, there is an answer. Go to onein100.co. That's onein100.co. Feeling lucky? Try it out now. The novelty of 1 in 100 is that there's no other place online that's doing online raffles to win tickets to events. It's a totally new way to score tickets to your favorite events, or a new way to score Celtics tickets. Tickets to events are hard to get, and the good ones, as we all know, are very expensive. The cost to potentially score tickets with 1 in 100 is a small fraction of the actual ticket price. Score a pair of tickets for less than the cost of a beer. Feeling lucky? Try it at onein100.co. Go there now and register onein100.co. Back with Mike Rodak, NFL Nation Bills reporter for ESPN. Okay, Mike, I want you to give me your best Bills Mafia story, and I'm praying you have at least one. And tell me about Bills Mafia. One. Yeah. Have you been jumping off the top of vans onto any foldable plastic tables?
I can safely say I have not. In fact, I generally try to stay away from the parking lots before games because it's been a pretty rough team, and I've had some critical comments of this team over my 6 years here, and I can't say that I'm the most well liked figure in Buffalo as far as it relates to the Bills and Bills Mafia. So I think I might be in danger if I was walking around some of the parking lots. But
let me stop you there, Mike. Let me stop you there and ask you, if if they're the Bills Mafia, are they just all rah-rah, we're behind our team no matter how bad they suck or how bad they are on the field. We don't want anybody criticizing them. Or are they the type of fan base that's like, look, if our team stinks, we want people telling us the way it is. I'm curious to get your read, because if it's the latter, then you have nothing to fear in that parking lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's definitely a segment of fans that realize our jobs and I think are pretty tied in with reality as it relates to the team. But there's also, I think, a pretty large segment of fans that, as mentioned before, just like they want to have a good time and they don't want to hear about what's obvious or what they already know in their words. That, yeah, we know our team sucks, but just let us enjoy our good time, essentially. So it's a mix. I don't want to describe every single fan the same way.
Right, I get that.
I mean, there's definitely. I should say, like, Bills Mafia in general started as really a group of fans that wanted to do charitable work, and in fact, there is still a charity organization. I believe it's called Buffalo Fan Base, FAM, where they do a lot of donations and fundraising. But in some ways, the Bills Mafia tagline or that name got hijacked by some of the less savory elements of the fan base, the ones that might get arrested after a game or before a game, the ones that are setting themselves on fire or breaking tables. So there's almost like a back and forth or a grappling in Buffalo between the fans who want that Bills Mafia name to be associated with charity and good works, and those who just kind of use it as, we're a bunch of fans that are going to attack whoever questions our team or something like that.
How does the team feel about it?
They tend not to use it as a team in their social media, in their public relations, anything official from the team, the coaches. You don't hear that term. And my assumption is that they are told not to use that term.
Right.
There's obviously a pretty negative connotation with Bills Mafia. And in fact, the name itself, again, it started with the Bills fans wanting to do charitable works, but they got that from an Adam Schefter tweet. I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago, where he tweeted something about Stevie Johnson. I think it was slightly off the mark, or he missed one detail about it. And Bills fans sort of jumped on him on Twitter, and he responded on Twitter that it was like, the Bills Mafia is coming after me. And that name kind of stuck, but obviously there's a lot of negative connotation there. The team doesn't use it. You might hear some players use it. Like when a player signs in Buffalo, you might see him tweet,
right,
welcome to Buffalo, like, glad to be part of Bills Mafia, et cetera. So it varies.
You might see an opposing superstar quarterback also make reference to it, as Tom Brady did on Instagram, actually right after dispatching of the Chicago Bears on Sunday. I assume you saw that, Mike, where he said, Bills Mafia, here we come.
I did, yes. Definitely saw that.
How is Tom Brady? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, we have the same question and answer there, which is, a wildly negative connotation to Tom Brady. Anything associated with him in Buffalo, the mere mention of his name tends to elicit some sort of reaction from people around here. It's definitely, a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's just beaten them down for so long, and fans realize that he is so good, and he's been so good against this team that they're just sick of him. The same way I think, there's some fans in basketball that are sick of LeBron James for certain reasons, and obviously, there's other reasons that are associated with LeBron James, with the Decision television show and all that. And there's other things that are associated with Bills fans hating. And I don't use that word lightly. I do think they hate Tom Brady. And there's been comments over the years. I think 4 or 5 years ago, Brady said the hotels in the city weren't great, which, there's probably a kernel of truth to that. And Bills fans jumped on him for that. And, there's definitely some questioning of Tom Brady's manhood, which I think is ridiculous, but you get a lot of that among Bills fans. You'll see in the parking lots the photo shoot he did with animals several years ago and other things that he said, or,
right,
that can be construed as not manly. Again, I think it's ridiculous, but that's things that Bills fans some Bills fans tend to jump on. But again, if you talk to, I think, the smarter fans, the ones who know football, they'll say, look, this guy is great. And we're just simply sick of having to play against him and have him dominate the division and keep us out of the playoffs all these years.
Speaking with Mike Rodak, NFL Nation Bills reporter for ESPN. Hey everybody, I want to tell you about an investing app that lets you buy and sell stocks, ETFs, options, and cryptos, all commission-free. It's called Robinhood. They strive to make financial services work for everyone, not just the wealthy. Non-intimidating ways for stock market newcomers to invest for the first time with true confidence. Simple and intuitive, clear design with data presented in an easy-to-digest way. Take it from me, I love their app. It was incredibly easy to track my recent purchases, trade stocks, and keep all of your profits. Place a trade in just 4 taps on your smartphone like I do. Robinhood web platform also lets you view stock collections, including the 100 most popular in sectors like entertainment and social media. Learn how to invest as you build your portfolio. Robinhood is giving listeners a free stock like Apple, Ford, or Sprint to help build your portfolio up. Sign up now at patriots.robinhood.com. That's patriots.robinhood.com. Back with Mike Rodak, the NFL Nation Bills reporter for ESPN. Speaking of Tom Brady, how in the world do the Bills figure they have a shot defending him on Monday night?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a pretty good defense this year. They've been, pretty inconsistent. If you go back to weeks 1 and 2, they gave up 47 points to the Ravens. A lot of that was because of Nathan Peterman and his turnovers and, the Ravens getting short fields. And week 2, they were letting Phillip Rivers throw all over them for the first half of that game, and they got blown out. But then for the 4 weeks after that, they were shutting teams down. I mean,
like
it was
Minnesota?
Minnesota, exactly. That defensive line, the Bills' defensive line just dominated the Vikings in that game. They really defined that game and causing Kirk Cousins to turn the ball over. I think there was forced fumbles on the first 2 drives of the game for the Vikings. They held Marcus Mariota to very few yards in a Titans game. Deshaun Watson didn't do a whole lot against them in the Houston game. And then all of a sudden, we thought, hey, this defense could be top 5 in the league. And then they come out last Sunday, and the Indianapolis Colts, who have a terrible running game, ran for 220 yards against them. So they're hard to figure out. There's a lot of talent on that defense. I think from a roster standpoint, they're in a pretty good spot on that side of the ball. They have a pretty good mix of veterans like Kyle Williams, who's been around here forever. He's playing pretty well still, and Lorenzo Alexander, who's also 35 years old, and he's playing great. And then they have some younger guys like Tre'Davious White, who they drafted last year, who's been, I don't want to say a shutdown corner, but he's certainly on his way to being one. And
right.
Probably the guy you're going to see lined up against Josh Gordon in terms of trying to shut down any sort of deep game the Patriots try to play. And then, Tremaine Edmonds in the middle, their first-round pick this year, middle linebacker. So they like what they have on defense, and if they can get a couple of balls to fall their way, tip pass at the line that they can intercept or some fumble from the Patriots that they can recover, then that's when they tend to win games, is when they get a break here or there defensively and they're able to pick up a couple turnovers and win that battle. So I do think it's possible that they can at least hold Tom Brady somewhat in check where, maybe he only throws for 230, 240 yards with maybe an interception or something here and there, where at least they're giving their offense a chance. Now, to be honest, the way they've been playing, to give their offense a real chance, they probably have to hold the opponent under 10 points, which I think is almost impossible to do with the Patriots. But I do think 20, 25, 28 points is a reasonable expectation for this defense to give up from Tom Brady.
I think the Bills have to get 2 touchdowns combined, either from special teams or defense or some combination, and not relying on the offense to score those 2 touchdowns for them to even have a prayer on Monday night. I think, privately, Sean McDermott knows that going in. We're going to have to get some incredible production from our other two units to help our offense out. Maybe it's not a touchdown per se, but a turnover that gives them such a short field, like 15, 20, 25 yards. It takes the pressure off the offense. I think that's what they're looking at coming in. I want to ask you a question about somebody that was a first-round pick of the Patriots in 2016. I think a lot of people back here in New England have forgotten about him, but Shaq Lawson, how's he looked?
Yeah, he had a pretty rough start to his career. So it would have been 2016 when the Bills chose him 19th overall, and that was when the Bills were running somewhat of a 3-4 defense under Rex Ryan. It wasn't a true 3-4, it was that Jets 3-4 that we saw for a few years under Rex, and he was playing outside linebacker. He was standing up at the line of scrimmage. It was a different sort of a feel for him than what he did at Clemson when he was a true 4-3 defensive end. So he was all out of sorts that year.
Right.
And then he comes in last year with Sean McDermott, who's, okay, we're back to a 4-3 defense with Wesley Frazier, sort of that, not really a Tampa 2, but it's a cover 2 zone-based defense, and he's back to playing end. Well, the problem last year was he was out of shape, he was overweight, he was not engaged as far as being on time. He was benched for the start of a game one time for a rules violation, and it was just clear that, he needed to sort of get his head on straight as an NFL player. Well, that's what we heard all of this past offseason, that he would be that player, that he would, take a step forward in his career. And I think we saw some signs of it in training camp. He had a couple of good plays in practice. He had a couple of good plays in the preseason. He flashed a little bit early on in this year when Trent Murphy was hurt, but just really still not an impact player. He's not the greatest pass rusher. He's pretty good against the run, but if you go back and do that 2016 draft over again, I don't know if he's a first-round pick.
Right.
Probably a second or third-round pick. So it's funny. There's actually only 3 players, I believe it is now, who were drafted by the Bills before 2017 who are still on the roster, and he's one of them. It's him. It's John Miller, who was a third-round pick in 2015, the guard, and Kyle Williams, who was a draft pick back in 2006, who's still around. Other than that, every single draft pick that the Bills had before last season is gone.
How star-crossed is LeSean McCoy, and what's the future hold for him?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's going to be much longer for him in Buffalo. I know there's multiple reports last week that the Bills were unlikely to trade him before the deadline, which is next Tuesday, and that they still view him as having a long-term future in Buffalo. I'm not convinced. I do think part of that might be posturing from a market creation standpoint, trying to get teams to buck up and to give more in the market. You look at his contract, he signed through next year, but the Bills can very easily get out of it after this year, as could another team. If they're acquiring that deal, there's really no guaranteed money. So it's a very tradable deal. You're looking at a 30-year-old running back who probably has another year or two, maybe 3 left, where he's still, an NFL starter playing at that level. And he's still, I think, good enough to contribute for another team, maybe the Eagles, and that's the team that's been mentioned that after losing Jay Ajayi. So for the Bills, it's, you could get that production from him the next year or two, but you're not making the playoffs this year, and you're probably not making them next year unless you can really get things turned around. So I do think it's going to take maybe a 4th, maybe a 5th-round pick in order to pry him away from the Bills, but I don't really see him as having a long-term future in Buffalo. I don't think he's playing at quite the same level that we saw a couple of years ago. He still has it. I mean, it's not like he's fallen off a cliff, but he's not quite as good as he was the last couple of years, and he's playing behind a bad offensive line. He's been hurt a couple times this year in the concussion protocol right now, and he's also playing for an offense that is falling behind in games, and there's just not a whole lot of opportunity for him to be a true runner.
Why is or isn't Sean McDermott the man for the long-term solution at head coach?
Yeah, it's funny. If you asked that question 7 or 8 months ago, I think anybody on the street here in Buffalo would say he's absolutely the guy. I mean, he always talks about the process and, The Bills are going to do things the right way, and they're going to find players who do things the right way and build a team as opposed to just collecting talent, and all sort of these buzz phrases and ideas that he brought to town last year. And I think players bought into it. I think the media bought into it. I think there's a lot of validity to it. I mean, this is a guy who did come up through a pretty successful system with Andy Reid with the Eagles and Ron Rivera with the Panthers as well. He seems to have his head on straight, but I think there's been an erosion of public support this season, even going back to training camp, the preseason, when everybody saw the direction things were going at quarterback. And obviously there's a huge blind spot, you could say, for Sean McDermott when you look at Nathan Peterman. This is a guy who everybody who has watched him play quarterback in the NFL realizes he just doesn't have it. I mean, that's fine. A lot of quarterbacks don't have it, and you cut them and you move on, and those guys move on with their lives. But Sean McDermott just seems determined to try to make it work with Nathan Peterman, one of his draft picks last year when he was running the draft. And we always hear about how much he likes Nathan Peterman from a character standpoint, the fact that he is a faith-based man and he's married, and sort of these nebulous things that don't really seem to apply to the football field. Sean McDermott loves that stuff, and he loves that out of Nathan Peterman. So he's lost a lot of public support just because of that situation, starting him in week one and then him being the backup still and being the first guy on the field in the Texans game and then losing that game for them. But overall, it's just people are starting to question, well, all this process and this direction that Sean McDermott talks about is not really not bearing fruit right now on the field for this team. And I think people are starting to look at it as sort of empty talk as opposed to a strategy that's actually working.
What about Brandon Beane, the general manager who I think was the star of the NFL in terms of GMs last year, building up all of those first-round picks over 2019 and 2020, correct? Or even 2018. And where are they now with Brandon Beane?
Yeah, so it's slightly, I think, different public perception of him, mostly because he came here a little bit later. So McDermott arrived in January of 2017. He was mostly in charge of that draft in 2017 when, might I add, they traded down from the number 10 spot. They got Tre'Davious White, who's a great player, but they traded out of the number 10 spot that the Chiefs took Patrick Mahomes with, and then 2 picks later, the Texans took Deshaun Watson. So that one could hurt to the Bills. Yeah, exactly. But then Brandon Beane was hired after that draft, so he doesn't have that on his record. And his only draft right now is the one where they took Josh Allen. So I think it's going to take some time for fans to judge Brandon Beane because it's mostly going to be based on the Josh Allen pick. And a lot of what led up to that, which, as you mentioned, was all the trades of Cordy Glenn and Tyrod Taylor and Marcel Darius and Sammy Watkins and Ronald Darby and Reggie Ragland, all these guys who he traded away, all the cap space that he cleared for next season. They have $80-90 million in cap space next year. They have an extra 5th-round pick, an extra 7th-round pick, an extra 4th-round pick, too, as well next year. And so that's what he's going to be judged, is how does he use that cap space, how does he use those draft picks, and ultimately, is Josh Allen the right guy? So I think it's going to take longer for Bills fans to develop an opinion on Brandon Beane as opposed to Sean McDermott, where the results of his coaching and his decisions last year are more immediately seen on the field.
Going to wrap it up with Terry and Kim Pegula. How accepting have Bills fans been to that family, to that power couple, since they took over the Bills? Obviously, they're owners of the Sabres. They, are a huge, huge part of Western New York in their grand plan to invest in Buffalo. I mean, they are really the reason the Bills are still in Buffalo, correct?
That's exactly it. That's the reason why I think there's so much admiration for them after all those years in the late stages of Ralph Wilson's life, where people had no idea what would happen to this team once he died. People thought they would go to Toronto because they were playing games there. People thought they would go to L.A., somewhere else. And when Ralph Wilson did die 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, there were other people bidding on the team. One of them was Donald Trump, which he says he was going to keep the team in Western New York. I mean, take him at his word, I guess, if you want to. And then there was John Bon Jovi, and a Toronto-based group that included Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, which owns, I believe, the Raptors and the Blue Jays. So, and Rogers Communications as well up there. So that was a group that clearly, even though they said they were going to keep the team in Buffalo, I mean, everything on paper was pointing to them moving the team to Toronto. So the Pegulas come in, and they outbid both of those other two groups, and they are local to the area. And that's, again, like you said, that's the reason why they're here. Now, with that said, while Bills fans are certainly grateful of that, I think there's also, some angst sometimes that they don't have a ton of experience running professional sports teams. Terry Pegula was in oil and natural gas in Pennsylvania. That's how he built his fortune. And to be honest, Kim Pegula was a waitress at a restaurant where he used to go. And that's how she met him, and that's how she got into the business. So neither of them really have a ton of experience running a sports team, and the results haven't been great overall for either the Bills or the Sabres under their ownership. But at the end of the day, a Bills fan or a Sabres fan will still tell you, well, at least we still have the team, and that's pretty important.
Want to thank everyone for downloading today's podcast. Want to thank our great guest, Mike Rodak, covering the Bills for ESPN's NFL Nation. Mike, I want you to tell everybody listening how they can follow you on Twitter.
Yes, it'll be at Mike Rodak, MikeRodak, or on ESPN.com, the Buffalo Bills page.
Perfect. Of course, we want to thank our great sponsors, 1-in-100 and Robinhood. For producer Michael Angi, our executive producer Larry H. Russell, and the founder of the network, Nick Gelso, this is Mike Petralia, and this has been the Patriots Beat podcast, powered by CLNS Media.